Welcome to the Hope for Healing Network. This is Cecily Henderson. Thank you so much for joining us in this safe space today. I'd like to introduce another Hope Talk. I have one of my favorite interviewees on. He's been just, such an inspiration to me. And we would like to talk about just some really deep topics, PTSD, and kind of what that entails. So, Dennis, welcome. Thank you so much for being willing to come on and talk about PTSD with me today.
Yes, ma'am. Of course. Anything I can do to help. There's a lot of folks out there that maybe need to hear this information. And so I'm very willing to talk about some very personal writings that I did about my sessions. Hopefully it'll help others.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. I read a little bit through it, and I'm telling you, the emotions that come up, because I think this will resonate with a lot of people, like the nightmares and these things. I remember going through, these feelings when I had and still have PTSD, and I've gotten through a lot of it. But people need to feel like they're not alone, that these are normal feelings, they're normal reactions, and that it's okay to work through them. So let's just kind of talk a little bit about, I mean, because it's interesting because, like, with your first session, they actually asked you to do an impact statement,
Correct.
and I'm just gonna, so the impact statement, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna read it.
For sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So it says, for the ENT session, I want you to start working on how you think about and explain the traumatic event, and pay attention to how traumatic events impacted your views on yourself, other people in the world, and then write at least a page on it. And you did, right? You wrote what
Three
you said,
pages.
3 pages. Yeah, 3 pages on this. And the first question was why the event happened to you.
Yeah. Um, and I'll just read what my answers that way you get the visceral um, and I didn't think I would be able to do a page because the subject matter was so reviling to me and abhorrent that I didn't really want to go there. But it just so happened that, when you're looking at your daughters and you're putting them to bed, you realize that you really owe it to them, of course, to yourself, but you got to dig even deeper for your kids, right? So you got to face the dragons and you can't ignore them and they're not going to go away. They're just going to get worse and bigger. So this was the moment, right? So um, here's what I wrote. Her first question to me then was that she wanted me to answer was why this event happened, right? Here's what I wrote. The answer is really quite simple. The event happened to me because I was assigned to the trauma room this day. It could have been anyone. In fact, if it had not been me, it would have been someone else's nightmare. Also, if by chance I had been assigned to a different team at that time, there would have been plenty of other days with just as many dead children. In other words, it was inevitable that I would run head on into a traumatic event like this. It's part of the job. However, what I did not count on was the way it would impact me. What a traumatic, heavy weight it would be on my shoulders and subconscious.
I mean, just when you said, day is just as, when you said the dead children, and I honestly, I don't, how difficult, because I can barely even listen to something like that, let alone experience it. How, so I want to keep going. I want to ask the next question. And
Well, this is that this is that book that I wrote about my and of course you can edit this out, but um there's a chapter in here called The Dark Passenger. And it's when I explain to my parents what's going on inside of me. And if you don't mind, can I just read this section really quick?
please, let's play. Yes, please.
Um, it says here, I once stood in the void between two sisters who were 8 and 3 years old. I helped do CPR on both of them. Sprinting up flights of stairs to retrieve crash blood for those little girls, my chest heaved for oxygen. As I topped the stairs and sprinted down the long hallway to the blood bank, I shouted, "Make a hole, coming through!" I then sprint back down the flights of stairs, taking them 4 or 5 steps at a time. With sweat pouring down my neck and back, I handed the blood off to a nurse and jumped in again to take over CPR from the other medic. When the desperate trauma surgeon couldn't get a central line on the younger sister, I blurted out, "How about a cut-down tray?" The tray was opened, deep incision in the groin made, the blood vessel revealed, and a central line was attained. It was of no use, though, and we all knew it. We'd known it for a long time, but no one wanted to quit. We fought against the impossible, and the room fell silent as the trauma resident looked to the attending for guidance. We all knew what needed to be done. The attending made that fateful turn of the head toward the clock. Oh, that diligent clock that kept on ticking and said, "Time of death." 3-year-old was worked a little longer, and then she too was pronounced dead. I fell silent remembering the scene and then continued because I was talking to my parents. I stepped through large pools of toddler blood that stuck to my shoes and made suction sounds as I walked. The intense iron smell of their precious blood assaulted my nose. All the while, I could hear the drunk driver who'd slammed into their car cursing the medical staff demanding pain meds. I saw the trails of bloody footprints running from the code room to the lab, to X-ray, and to the nursing station, standing there, taking in the scene, trying to catch my breath. Right then, amidst that horrific scene, that same rusty chisel was placed against the guard of my heart. Then came the swing of the unfeeling cold hammer held by the dark passenger, and a tiny fleck of the guard that had been so lovingly placed around my heart spun off into darkness. One of the instructions was, and I'll just read it, it says, and it's short, it says, "Consider the effects this traumatic event had on your beliefs about yourself, others, and the world in the following areas." And this was very interesting. In the areas of how it beliefs about myself, others, and the world in the areas of safety, trust, power/control, esteem, and intimacy. And I was to write a page, and then I wrote 3. The first thing she said was, "Consider the effects the traumatic event had on you about your beliefs about myself," right? So I said, "At first, I was surprised that I could witness such events." And now, mind you, these are unedited, raw from the moment. "At first, I was surprised that I could witness such events and still perform my job. I found that I would see such horrible things and still function. Truthfully, this was a nice surprise because in emergency medicine, you never know if you have what it takes until you are in the mix. I was pleased to discover I could hack it. However, I found myself thinking about this toddler quite often, and I even found her obituary in the newspaper and cut it out and taped it into a journal I was keeping at the time." Um, you know, already you can see where there's danger there, right? Yeah, it was kind of like not kind of like it absolutely was a quality check on my part to see if I was strong enough to be in chaos and still function and think clearly. Whereas large majority of people would freeze or run. um, I was able to think clearly and and actually anticipate what the doctors were going to need next. But my big danger looking back on it was cutting out her obituary in the newspaper, right? It's like I had no business doing that. And I didn't want her to be forgotten,
Mm. That's
you
what I
know?
was thinking.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
And that's hard because, and you brought up a good point because for a long time I could not talk. When I lost my mom, I was 18, and I couldn't talk about her or anything about her because it would just stir up so many emotions and pain and sadness and loss. Now I can talk about her fine. And it actually has helped me to heal, being able to look at her pictures, talk about
Mhm.
her. And I think that people need to understand that, yeah, at the beginning, you're going to have a really difficult time, talking about that person. But as you continue to heal, you will get to that point that you can talk about them, you can discuss good things. But for you, that's a different situation because you never really knew this person. And that, like you said, I agree, it could be very dangerous because you don't have any of those good memories connected with this sweet little girl. That you only have this one negative connection or difficult trauma connection with her.
You know what's really amazing is I didn't think of it until this very moment right now. But like her and all these other ones, if looking through my book and everything, they're always little girls. And it's interesting. And then I would go on later on and get married and have two daughters, you know. It was like God was saying it's okay. And then someone once told me, because I was describing the dreams where these little girls would visit me in my dreams, and they were never accusatory because we had tried very hard to save them, or they were never menacing. Um, I just felt really bad that we couldn't save them. And we had worked so hard, and I had ran flights of stairs and sprinted down in hallways, and we had all this stuff. And someone once told me, "Did you think that maybe they're visiting you to tell you it's okay? Like they're okay, and to not drive yourself crazy?" And they were like, "How do they appear in your dreams?" I'm like, "They're just standing there in a white gown in darkness, but there's a bright light on them.